This is a follow-up video from a class lecture where we talked about anthropological theory and methods. I want to go through a couple things, and especially the last slide that we didn't have time for during class. So if you recall, we started talking about some major theoretical frameworks in anthropology over time. And one thing we didn't talk about was applying this to Elliot Fratkin and the book Libon. Which theoretical framework does he use? And even though we talked about historical particularism and Franz Boas being quote-unquote the father of contemporary American anthropology, historical particularism isn't used so much today as a way that we describe our anthropological theory, but it is the basis of a lot of what we do. So from this, we have the concept of cultural relativism, which is definitely driving Elliot Fratkin's work. To describe what he does in Kenya, I would refer to that as ethnography or traditional ethnography. And in addition, I would say that Elliot Fratkin draws on political economy and political ecology. However, you don't see that so much in the book Libon. You see that a lot as Elliot Fratkin goes on to explore issues of, he got into climate change and how that is affecting pastoralists, looking at droughts and looking at how pastoralists like the Samburu, Ariel, and others are treated by their governments and international organizations, looking at some of those global connections and issues of power and inequality definitely makes him a political ecologist, right? But what you see him do in Libon, you could describe that as traditional ethnography, the main form of research that anthropologists do. Okay, we talked about methods. We talked about quantitative data that can be analyzed through statistical analysis. And then we talked about qualitative data that gets at some of the richness of cultures and the emic perspectives that people have on their own cultures. I talked about how anthropologists work with that data in qualitative research. And then finally, we came to this slide that we didn't have time to go through, where I was going to ask students to talk about where they see these concepts when they're reading Libon. So first of all, rapport. You can pronounce this word in different ways, the first term here, but a lot of people pronounce it in this French style where you're not pronouncing the T at the end. So it's rapport. How does Elliot build rapport in the fieldwork? He has to have a good, friendly, trusting relationship with the people that he works with. So there are various ways that he establishes that. In the beginning, of course, by doing favors for the Libon. He goes to fetch his son, bring him back to the village. Doing what people ask him to help out with is a good way that he builds some rapport, right? Ethnographic research is how we would term the type of research he's doing. It's marked by spending a long period of time in one place doing cultural immersion, which would include participant observation, interviews, and other techniques. Cultural relativism is a perspective that we see him using in contrast with the missionaries that he meets. He is attempting to be very open-minded and to learn from these local people and to try to prevent himself from being too judgmental. Theoretical framework at the time when he was doing this initial research, his own theoretical framework was still evolving. But just spoke to that a little bit. It's you know, very much tied to traditional ethnography and cultural relativism, but he also gets into political economy and political ecology. Um, he does a survey when he's new to his village. It's a way of getting kind of a big picture of who lives there, how many people in their family, other kind of statistical data about them. But surveying is not his main form of research. Random sampling is not something that I recall Eliot doing in the field. This would be if you don't have time to go to every house, you would just go to some of them, and to avoid bias in which ones you visit, you would use some random means of selecting, like rolling a dice or, um, picking a card or something like that. Sometimes anthropologists who are doing phone surveys will flip through the phone book and have a certain method, like how many pages they're going to go through before they select the top one at the top of the page to call. Participant observation, I'd like you to ask yourselves how his participation in some cultural practices might enrich his understanding of the culture. So hanging out with the warriors and actually engaging in some of the same activities with them, even though he's never going to have a total insider perspective, it brings him a little bit closer to understanding what things mean to people. Quantitative versus qualitative research. His research is clearly very qualitative in nature, and that's characteristic of most cultural anthropologists. This is one thing that distinguishes us from a lot of sociologists. We share a lot of the same methods, but they tend to be a little bit heavier on the quantitative side and on the surveying and statistics side. Longitudinal research. This is one reason why I wanted you to read chapter 5 of Libon, to understand that the memoir, the bulk of the memoir, is just about this very first stage of Eliot's research in Lukumai, and he goes back many years later. He takes his wife and he takes his daughter, and he continues to do research and to meet with those people and to learn more about them and about the broader region as well. Longitudinal research allows cultural anthropologists and other researchers to understand change over time, because cultures are always changing. Problem-oriented ethnography and applied anthropology. Again, drawing from chapter 5, you can think about where is Eliot going with his work, and he's definitely going in these directions, where he's initially just trying to learn about the culture, but later on he's trying to apply his anthropological expertise and help solve problems, like advocating on behalf of pastoralists for support that they might need, and policies that might be beneficial to them during times of like very severe drought, for example. You also see his wife, Marty, doing very problem-oriented work with women and children when she joins him in the field. There's a lot that you all can probably add to this as you're thinking about your main memories from reading the book, but those are kind of a few of my thoughts at the top of my head. Okay, that's it. Thanks so much.